Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. The chill of a late Washington evening had settled over the city, casting long shadows across the streets as Alexander hurried home from work. His life had become a steady, predictable rhythm, one that suited his personality. He had built a stable career, providing Olivia, his wife, with a comfortable home and a secure future. He loved her deeply, even if their marriage had settled into a quiet routine over the last few years. But Alexander wasn't one to complain about routine. He cherished it. Every morning, he would rise early, make them both coffee, and leave the house for his office by 7 a.m. Olivia would still be asleep by the time he left, her dark hair spread across the pillows. He'd kiss her on the forehead before slipping out the door, a small gesture that had once brought her a smile, but now barely registered with her. At the office, Alexander's mind was sharp, focused. He was a respected project manager in his firm, known for his efficiency and reliability. His team looked up to him, and his bosses trusted him with the most complex assignments. For years, he had poured himself into his work, knowing that his efforts would pay off for him and Olivia in the long run. He pictured them growing old together, traveling once they both had time to relax, enjoying the fruits of their hard-earned success. But lately, something felt off. Olivia had grown distant. She no longer asked about his day when he came home. She no longer laughed at his jokes, the ones that used to make her eyes sparkle with amusement. The small, intimate moments that once bonded them were slipping away, replaced by a cold indifference that Alexander couldn't quite understand. It started subtly at first. Olivia began spending more time out with friends, coming home later than usual. When he asked her where she had been, she would brush off the question with vague answers: dinner with colleagues, a late yoga class, or a drink with an old friend. Alexander wanted to believe her. He trusted her, after all, and he didn't want to be the paranoid husband. But tonight felt different. As he stepped into their shared home, he immediately noticed something was off. Olivia wasn't sitting on the couch in her usual spot, reading a book or scrolling through her phone. Instead, she was standing by the door, dressed in a way that took Alexander by surprise. She wore a red satin dress, the kind that clung to her body in all the right places, with a plunging neckline that revealed more than usual. It was the kind of dress she hadn't worn in years, certainly not since their early days of dating. Her makeup was done meticulously, bold lipstick, perfectly applied eyeliner. She looked stunning, no doubt about it. But this wasn't the Olivia he had come to know in recent years. Alexander's heart sank, and 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Why was she dressed like this? Where was she going? And why hadn't she mentioned anything about it earlier? Olivia? Alexander's voice was filled with confusion as he took a step toward her. Where are you going? She didn't turn to look at him right away. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her handbag, her face calm but distant. Out, she said, her voice smooth and devoid of emotion. Out? Where? Alexander asked, his unease growing by the second. You didn't mention any plans earlier. It's just a party, Olivia replied, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were cold, detached. I didn't think it was a big deal. Alexander frowned. A party? With who? Just some friends from work, she said, as if that explained everything. Alexander felt a knot forming in his stomach. Why are you dressed like that to meet friends from work? Olivia's lips curled into a small, almost mocking smile. It's not just a work thing. It's William's party. He invited me, and I didn't want to say no. There it was, William. The name had come up in passing before, a colleague of Olivia's. Alexander hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just another coworker, just another man in Olivia's life. But now, standing in their living room, watching his wife prepare to walk out the door dressed to impress, Alexander realized something wasn't right. Who is William? Alexander asked, though his voice was already edged with suspicion. He's just a colleague, Olivia replied, her tone casual, as if that were enough to put his mind at ease. But it didn't. It only made things worse. He's funny, charming, and we've gotten close over the last few months. Alexander's heart dropped. Close? Olivia shrugged. Yes. We talk. We laugh. He invited me to this party, and I didn't see any harm in going. And what exactly is going on between you and William? Alexander demanded, his voice rising now. The knot in his stomach had turned into full-blown dread. Olivia sighed, rolling her eyes as if this conversation were nothing more than an inconvenience. Alexander, it's nothing serious. It's just a party. Don't make a big deal out of it. A party with another man? A man you've gotten close to? Alexander felt his anger bubbling to the surface. Do you hear yourself right now? You're about to walk out that door dressed like that to go to another man's party. And you think it's nothing? Yes, Alexander, I do. Olivia shot back, her patience wearing thin. I'm not doing anything wrong. I need space. I need something more than what we've become. Alexander was stunned into silence. He had given Olivia everything, his time, his love, his loyalty. And now, she was telling him that it wasn't enough? That their life together wasn't enough? Olivia, he began, his voice trembling with the weight of his emotions. If you walk out that door tonight, I don't know if we can come back from this. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe we can't, she said softly, before turning and walking out the door. The slam of the door echoed through the empty house, leaving Alexander standing there, alone and heartbroken. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life with, had just chosen another man over him. And the worst part was she didn't seem to care. Hours passed, and Alexander couldn't shake the images of Olivia in that red dress, laughing with another man, someone who had managed to steal her attention, her affection, and perhaps more. He paced the living room, his mind swirling with possibilities. Had she been seeing William behind his back? Was tonight just the culmination of weeks, months, of betrayal? Unable to hold back any longer, he grabbed his phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before a man's voice answered. Yeah. The voice was deep, casual, and filled with an arrogance that made Alexander's blood boil. Put Olivia on the phone, Alexander demanded, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Who's this? The man asked, his tone laced with amusement. Her husband, Alexander growled, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a brief silence on the other end before the man chuckled. Listen, pal, Olivia's busy right now. You're going to have to wait. Alexander's world came crashing down around him. He heard Olivia's voice in the background, laughing softly, her tone flirtatious and carefree. The woman who had promised to love him, to stay with him through thick and thin, was now with another man, completely indifferent to the pain she was causing him. Hang up the phone, William. Olivia's voice echoed faintly, and then the line went dead. Alexander stood there numb, the phone still clutched in his hand. The weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. He had lost her, truly, completely lost her. There was no saving their marriage now, no fixing what had been broken beyond repair. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt powerless. He had always been the strong one, the reliable one, the one who could fix any problem that came their way. But now, standing alone in the house they had built together, he realized there was nothing he could do. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. Instead, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what could have been. He pictured Olivia with William, laughing, dancing, maybe even more. The images were too painful to bear, but they wouldn't stop coming. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Alexander had made a decision. He couldn't stay here any longer, not in this house, not in this city. Everything around him was a reminder of what he had lost. He needed to leave, to start over somewhere new. Without a second thought, Alexander packed a suitcase, filled with only the essentials. He wasn't sure where he would go, but he knew he couldn't stay. With a heavy heart, he grabbed his keys and left the house, locking the door behind him for what he knew would be the last time. As Alexander drove away from the home he and Olivia once shared, the weight of the decision settled over him like a thick fog. The memories of their life together flashed through his mind. Their honeymoon, the small apartment where they spent their first year as newlyweds, the countless dinners where they planned for the future. All of it felt like a distant dream, now shattered by the reality of Olivia's betrayal. The farther he drove, the more detached he became from the life he had built. After hours on the road, Alexander found himself in a small town miles away from Washington. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, And most importantly, it was far from Olivia. He checked into a modest motel, planning to stay just long enough to gather his thoughts and decide his next steps. In the solitude of that small, dimly lit room, the reality of his situation hit him like a punch to the gut. His marriage was over, and he had to rebuild his life from the ground up. The first thing Alexander did the next morning was call a lawyer. He explained everything: Olivia's growing distance, the betrayal, and the cold, indifferent way she had walked out on him for another man. The lawyer was calm, methodical, asking detailed questions about their financials, shared assets, and whether or not they had signed a prenuptial agreement. By the end of the conversation, Alexander felt a strange sense of relief. The legal proceedings would take time, but at least there was a clear path forward. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Olivia's life was anything but simple. The thrill of her night with William had quickly faded, and the reality of her choices began to settle in. William was charming and fun, but he wasn't Alexander. He didn't offer the stability or unwavering support that Alexander had. In fact, William had grown distant after that night, his once flirtatious demeanor replaced with a casual indifference that Olivia hadn't expected. The excitement of sneaking around had worn off, and Olivia found herself missing the safety net of her marriage. But it was too late. Alexander wasn't returning her calls. He wasn't pleading with her to come back like she had assumed he would. Instead, she was met with cold silence, and that silence began to eat away at her. The house she had once found suffocating now felt empty and lonely. The life she had wanted to escape suddenly seemed like something precious that she had thrown away too easily. As weeks passed, Olivia tried to contact Alexander again, this time with more urgency. She wanted to explain herself, to tell him that it had been a mistake, that they could work through it. But every call went unanswered. Alexander had completely cut her off. In her desperation, she even drove to the places they used to frequent together, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But he was gone, completely vanished from her life. And with each passing day, the enormity of what she had done weighed heavier on her heart. Alexander, however, was determined to start over. He rented a small apartment in the town, a far cry from the spacious home he had once shared with Olivia, but it was a fresh start. His mornings were spent at a local gym, where he began to rebuild his strength, both physically and mentally. The simple routine gave him something to hold on to. It wasn't long before he found work at a local firm, his experience and skills in project management earning him a position quickly. The days passed, and slowly, he began to feel a sense of normalcy returning to his life. But the wounds Olivia had inflicted weren't so easily healed. Alexander's nights were still filled with restless dreams of betrayal, of hearing her laugh with William, of the sound of the door slamming as she walked out. He couldn't shake the feeling of being discarded, of being seen as less than enough for the woman he had loved so deeply. And that feeling of inadequacy, of betrayal, festered inside him, growing darker by the day. One evening, as Alexander sat alone in his apartment, a knock on the door broke the silence. It was Olivia. She stood there, looking smaller than he remembered, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She had tracked him down, driven all the way to this small town to try and fix what was broken. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake." Alexander stared at her, the woman who had once been his whole world, now standing before him like a stranger. He didn't say anything at first, just let her words hang in the air between them. "I shouldn't have done what I did," Olivia continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk?" For a moment, Alexander felt the old, familiar pull of his love for her. But then the image of her with William flashed through his mind, and the pain resurfaced, sharper than ever. His jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "No," he said, his voice firm. "We're done, Olivia. There's nothing left to talk about." Olivia's face crumpled, and she took a step forward, reaching out for him. "Please, Alex, I'm begging you. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I wanted something different, but I was wrong. I want you." But Alexander had heard enough. He took a step back, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "You made your choice, Olivia, and now you have to live with it." He closed the door on her, the final chapter of their relationship ending with the soft click of the latch. Outside, Olivia stood frozen, the realization of what she had lost settling in. There would be no reconciliation, no second chance. Alexander was truly gone from her life, and the future she had once taken for granted was now a distant memory. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Alexander received the paperwork in the mail, the legal end of his marriage marked by a few signatures on a page. He felt a strange sense of closure as he signed his name and mailed the papers back. It was over. The chapter of his life that had been defined by Olivia's betrayal was finally closed. Olivia, on the other hand, struggled to move on. William had long since disappeared from her life, moving on to the next conquest, leaving Olivia to pick up the pieces of the life she had shattered. She spent her days alone in the house that now felt more like a prison than a home. The silence was suffocating, and the regret that gnawed at her heart grew with each passing day. But for Alexander, life slowly began to improve. He focused on his work, built new friendships, and even started to date again. The scars Olivia had left were still there, but they no longer defined him. He had learned from the pain, grown stronger because of it. And in time, he found himself laughing again, smiling again, living again. In the end, Alexander realized that Olivia's betrayal, as painful as it had been, had set him free. Free from a relationship that no longer served him, free from the weight of her indifference, and free to rebuild a life that was his own. And as he stood on the balcony of his new apartment, looking out over the town that had become his sanctuary, he knew that he had come out of it stronger. He was no longer the man who had been broken by Olivia's infidelity. He was someone new, someone better, and that, more than anything, was the sweetest revenge of all. Second story. I've been dating my boyfriend, 25 years old, since 2020. Most of our relationship was long distance, but we were both happy and always excited to see each other. However, last year, I noticed he started acting distant and cold. He was having a minor surgery, so I was worried about him, but he never told me how he was doing or gave any updates. He avoided my calls and almost never replied to my texts. At that time, I was living 3,000 kilometers away from home. It was my first time being alone, and I was feeling really sad. After almost 2 months of him barely speaking to me, I practically had to force him to visit me. When he finally came, we had a lot of arguments, and I broke up with him, but he didn't accept it. He convinced me to stay, so we got back together. Later, I left my job and offered to move in with him, but he ignored me for 10 days. During that time, I was frantically looking for jobs, but he kept avoiding the conversation, even though his family has 2 extra houses. I tried to break up with him again because I felt it was over for me, but he acted like we were still together. A month later, I went on a trip and kissed another guy, and now he's calling me a cheater? I called him and said I needed a break and asked him to stop texting me. We didn't talk for 3 months, but then he called me a cheater and said he was going to try to forgive me. After I forgave everything he did, this feels so unfair. So, does this make me a cheater? Should I just block him everywhere?